This video is about my grandfather, George Washington Ruth. He will speak for about 30 minutes in this audio interview. He made it around 1970. And to go along with his audio, I dropped in World War I related photos and video clips. I also added a lot of maps to accompany his audio so we know just where he is at in France when he relates these experiences with us. I'm going to set up this video a little bit, but if you want to skip this part, you can jump right to the 4-minute and 50-second mark of this video, and it'll take you right to where George, my grandfather, begins to speak. Okay, so a little background. George and his wife, Elizabeth Seidel Ruth, had 2 children. My uncle James Douglas Ruth, Jim, and my mom Nancy. Now, my mom Nancy passed away several years ago, but it wasn't until a couple months ago when we were going through her things in her cedar chest when we came across the Reader's Digest book. But it turns out it wasn't a book at all, but rather a box disguised to look like a book. Well, when I opened the box, I found 2 cassette tapes. One tape was labeled George Ruth, Life with Family, Recollections of His Brother Carl. The other tape was labeled George Ruth, World War I Experiences. There was also a name and an address stamped on the cassette. It was stamped with James P. Ruth, and it had an Arlington, Virginia address. Now, the interviewer, James P. Ruth, did the interview of George on a reel-to-reel tape, then must have later copied it over to cassette tape, but I still don't know who James P. Ruth is, and it's a bit of a mystery, yet to be solved. So I've made several family videos in the past, and after listening to Grandpa's World War I tape, it became a no-brainer to me to do the same with this historic recording. And when I talked to George Ruth's son, my Uncle Jim, about what I had found, these tapes that I found, and what I was doing with them, he shared my excitement, and he was kind enough to mail me a packet of some of Grandpa's things that he carried around with him in the war. And I will save a spot toward the end of this video to talk about those items. So here we go with the video, starting with a Dan Snow who explains World War I in 2.5 minutes.
So Franz Ferdinand, heir to the Austro-Hungarian throne, big empire, he's killed in Bosnia. Now the Austrian government is furious to find out that some of rogue elements of neighbouring Serbia's government had helped supply weapons and things like that to the assassins. So they decided to teach the Serbians a lesson they would never ever forget. So Austria wants to crush Serbia, but little Serbia wasn't alone. That's the problem. They've got a big, huge mate, Russia. They've got a huge army. They're not going to let Serbia get pushed around. So Austria can't take on Russia by herself. They look around. They've got a big ally too, Germany, most powerful army in Europe. Many Germans think, well, war against Russia is inevitable. Let's take them now while we have the chance. We've got a good army. We've got a big advantage over them. So you've got Russia and Austria and Serbia against Germany and Austria. But the Russians can't take on the Germans alone. So the Russians make a deal with the French. They've made a deal with the French that the French will get involved if Russia's at war with Germany. Germany knows this, so it makes a plan to deal with both the French and the Russians. It sends most of its army to attack the French before turning to attack the Russians. And in order to give the French a really good kicking to increase their chance of doing that, they send most of the German army. The plan is to send through Belgium, round the side of the French army. It's a brilliant plan, except one little detail. Belgium's neutral, so everyone's agreed to protect Belgium, including the British. Now, the problem with the British, they're the biggest empire in the world. It'd be silly to annoy them, but the Germans take the gamble that they won't mind about the Belgians, and even if they do mind, they won't be able to get involved quick enough because the Germans will have beaten the French by then. So, Austria attacks Serbia. Russia stands up to defend Serbia. France agrees to stand by Russia. And then Germany sends thousands of troops through Belgium to smash France while dealing with the Russians. This brings Britain in, and all the European powers now at war. They drag in their empires. Canada, India, most of Africa, Australasia, a place like that. Eventually, most of the world would be at war because places like the Ottoman Empire in the Middle East, Brazil, China, the USA, they're all dragged in by the fighting as well. Basically, everyone called each other's bluff, but found out they weren't bluffing. The war that resulted destroyed empires and ruined millions of people's lives.
Off that other wheel, George, so I changed them. Now we're back on a fresh one. And I asked you about going off to World War I. Sort of give us an idea of what happened.
As I said, Chetton and I enlisted in the Marine Corps in Cleveland on June 6, 1917, to go down to the training camp at Parris Island, where we were in training for approximately 11 weeks. From there, we went to Quantico, Virginia, a camp that was just being started at that time. And at which place we got training in new style of warfare, which the French and English were having with the Germans, including trenches, barbed wire entanglements, and so forth, which was not in the old Marine Corps style. We got orders to move out. We were on a German boat that was interned in United States ports during the war. Had been previously the Crown Prince Wilhelm II, somewhere about 800 or 900 feet long, had been renamed the Von Steuben. And when we sailed from New York Harbor, there was about 1,200 crewmen, but there was only 1,000 of us and 50 nurses. And later on, that ship carried, I understood, about 7,000 to 8,000 troops. So we had lots of space when we went over, and it was quite an eventful trip. We were in a convoy of 4 ships, the America, the Agamemnon, and the Mount Vernon. And we were rammed in mid-ocean by one of those other ships. They came in prow to prow almost, but it did make a big dent in the prow of our ship, so much so that they had to sandbag, and incidentally, there was a man who was thrown over and went on to our ship. 2 or 3 nights after that, Chet and I and several others were up in the lifeboat singing about dusk at night, and all of a sudden, one of us saw a smooth line coming, and he said, "Torpedo," because we could see that coming from our left towards the ship. And we knew we saw it because within a matter of seconds, the bugler came out and sounded general quarters, and machine guns started popping, and there was a general alarm all over the ship. Most of it was imagination because this torpedo went by in front of the ship, and the reason was that we were not making the speed that the engines were saying that we'd make. Because of our caved-in prow, we can't say that that accident of damage to the ship would have saved us if it hadn't happened, because we wouldn't have been in the same location at all. It would have been further along if it hadn't happened. But it saved us under the circumstances in that particular case because we were not torpedoed. But all of us were pretty glad to get to Brest Harbor, where we disembarked. From there, we were sent down immediately by train to Belleau. We were down there at Christmas time of 1917. But early in the spring, I think, probably late February, early March, we were sent over near American headquarters in the foothills of the Bouresches Mountains at a place called Chaumont. Shortly after that, about the latter part of March or early April, we detrained not very far from a place called Dugny, that is not very far from Verdun, and that was our destination. It was something that will probably never be seen again. The trenches that existed around the Verdun area. It's hard to imagine. Practically all of them were on hillsides, and anywhere from 8, 10, and even 12 feet deep, so that passage of troops could not be seen in there, and you had to step up to get on a firing step to see over. And no man's land at that point where we originally went in was about a half a mile from the Germans. Going there the first time, two of us, being met by Frenchmen, we had passed different outposts, and every once in a while we would feel a pistol in our back. Then the Frenchman would explain and give the countersign, and we were allowed to go in. We got our troops in that night. The Germans do something with that because they kept putting up star shells over no man's land. Knew some activity was on, and that was our initiation into the front lines. And we started moving from one place to another, and other troops came in, and night of the 11th or 12th of April, some naval guns came up on a narrow gauge on the mountains away from no man's land and blasted all night from the 8 and 10-inch guns into the background, trying to get ammunition dumps and so forth. And then they pulled out before daylight. So it was either one day or 2 days after that, on April 13th, that the Germans retaliated with both high explosive and mustard gas. And we had crews that were working well down the hillside. This was where we were sleeping, and most of us were staying. It was up on the side of the hills in this valley yet. This is a series of hills and a series of valleys in between, parallel to the front line. And there was work parties that got caught down a ways, and they had to come back while they got pretty badly hurt, because one thing about mustard gas is that it burns wherever there is moisture. And so in hurrying, they got heated up, and they got pretty badly hurt. But we were very lucky that we were not around the watering hole, which was really hit the worst of all, and the company that was there, I believe, was just about 50% casualties after that one night. And this was on about a 5-mile front, and the estimate was that in that night time that there was 100,000 shells on us. Well, there was lots of trees on the hillside there, and both the high explosive and the mustard gas shells couldn't hit us directly, but they would hit the trees, and in the case of the mustard gas, would splash down in our area. So no more than started, and we had the gas alert. And I remember that night I had the bed at the end of the barracks house, and sure that I slept some, but whatever I slept that night was with a gas mask on, naturally. The next morning, I went up to see how Chet was, and that was probably about a mile or a mile and a half. And we were in different platoons. We were in the same company, but I was in the 3rd platoon and he was in the 2nd platoon. And my recollection of that mile or mile and a half walk was that I never walked on ground in all that distance. The boughs of the trees were so dense down on the ground that I was walking on that all the way, because that was pretty heavy shelling. And when I got up to where Chet was, he had been in the dugout, but he had come out sometime before, but sometime after he'd left the dugout, why a shell went right through into the dugout, and if he'd been there, he would have been killed. But he was evacuated that same day. Already had been evacuated when I got up there to the line hospitals in support of the Verdun line. And then a couple of days later, I found that I was burnt by mustard gas in delayed action, and I was evacuated. And the ambulance driver that took me out thought that name sounded familiar. He recalled that he'd taken Chet out a day or two before and left him at a place where we stopped, but those hospitals had all been filled, and he had to take me and I think 2 or 3 others that were in the ambulance about 50 miles from the front line to a French hospital, luckily, and it was at Pierre Lafitte L'Hôpital 17/2, and all of the cases there were mustard gas cases, and mine was a comparatively simple one. I saw the night that I got there, why it took me into one ward, and it sounded just as if there was just maybe 30 or 40 people that were in that ward, as if they were all dying because they were all coughing, and it was a terrible sound that I heard.
Why was the French hospital better?
I was lucky to be in the French hospital because there was no American hospitals that had any experience at all up to that time of mustard gas, which is one of the most deadly of the gases, much more so than phosgene, and of course the high explosive shrapnel. They'll damage and they'll hurt, but they have to hit you first. But this mustard gas will permeate through the area, and I've seen cases there in the hospital where there was a drop of blood at every place that there was a pore on a person's arm that was in sight. And there were a few from my company there, and I know one of them I've seen in recent years in the company reunion in Chicago. They gave tests on me that were unique, like putting a flame and small inverted fish bowls, about 1 or 2 inches in diameter, and then putting them over your back, and they could tell from the color of your skin under the vacuum, and my lungs were not apparently infected. And about the only thing that Chet had where he was to his eyes after what was evacuated there. But the only time in my life that I never had a drink of water in the 3 weeks to 4 weeks that I was there in the hospital, because the water was non-potable and they served only wine, coffee, and warm milk. I recovered, and Chet had already rejoined a company that was on march, and I rejoined them north of Paris, joined the 1st Division that was in fighting at that point. I was a part of the 2nd Regular Army Division, and we were attached to them. And Meaux is about 25 or 30 miles from Paris, and we were let out there on, I think, the 31st of May. And that was when the Germans had broken through near Château-Thierry, and which was just a little further along the Paris-Metz road. We were let out at night. The morning after that, Chet and I went scouting around, and we came to a farmhouse at a place called Lucy Bouchard. Lucy, well, we just called it Lucy. Bouchard, I think it was. And we went in this farmhouse, which was vacant, and the morning meal was still warm there. There was some potatoes and I think some meat, and the French had just left a matter of probably 1 or 2 hours before that. But we had to look for places for food, potatoes and so forth there, because we just had our emergency rations there for a matter of 2 or 3 days, and we were heating bacon over candles among the trees to get it a little bit warm in our mess kit, and eating hardtack or anything else that we could find. Of course, there's a lot of interesting items of what happened in those few days, even to their pulling a cow over into the cannon shots being fired so it would be killed and we'd get beef. At least hesitated to shoot it outright. And we were very close to the town of Bouresches. And on the 6th of June, or just exactly 1 year after Chet and I had enlisted in Cleveland, Ohio, we attacked the town of Bouresches.
That was 1918.
June of 1918. It was on the railroad. The Germans had just captured it, probably 3-4 days before that. The town of Bouresches, which at that time the Germans had balloons up, so they could spot the shelling very well. Our attack started out of the trees and across about 500 yards of grain, level ground. And we were deployed, spread out, but we had to stay in the wheat field there, deployed, because we were in a second wave. One was already fighting in Bouresches from another company. And one thing vividly is in my mind, you could hear the bullets go through the wheat. And one of our lieutenants was back at officers' school when we went forward, so he was not there. His name was Moore. He'd gone to Princeton, Bill Moore, and he had a German Shepherd dog. And he'd left the dog with our captain, Captain Worth, and Captain Worth was out ahead of us, and so was the dog. And you could see the dog biting at the noises of bullets hitting through the wheat. My luck was with me right there because Spike Shannon was from Chicago. That was an engineer, was just first person ahead of me. He was roughly 5 or 6 feet ahead of me and 3 or 4 feet over. And he was hit in his left leg with about 7 bullets and had to be evacuated. I was able to get him over to the edge of the trees, wasn't too far away, and call for the meds to help and tell them, and then I had to be back in position. We went on. Well, we got into that town of Bouresches that night of the 6th. My platoon immediately started digging a trench outside of a building because the shells would hit the building walls while they'd crumple down on us, and they were shelling the place pretty heavily. So we dug in trench about 8 feet on the far side away from that. And the next day, night of the 7th, one end of our line was right at the end of the building, and it could be seen from other buildings, and a German sniper was working on some of our men, and I think wounded 1 or 2. Well, this was a farm building, and it had a clay tile roof, as most of them had been, and there was a cellar there. We got a ladder, and I went up under the eaves of this building to spot this sniper, which I did, and I'd call down how our shots were doing and directing them. But somewhere just about, I think I was coming down at that time off the ladder. Anyway, I wasn't up next to the roof when, as I was later told, my 2 or 3 shells came through the roof of the building, and I was knocked out. I was unconscious, and they found me down there, but they took me over to the sick bay in town there that night where it had been set up. It so happened that there was a German counterattack that night along the railroad track, not far from there, but it was repulsed, and the next morning I was evacuated to Meaux, where there was a tag put on me, and I was given some morphine, and I didn't have a wound on me, but didn't come to until I was in Paris at the new Red Cross Hospital number 5 in the outer racetrack in the Bois de Boulogne.
How many days was that?
I think, let's see, that happened on the night of the 7th. I would have been evacuated on the morning of the 8th. Well, I guess I was probably out maybe 48 hours.
Out cold?
As far as I know, though I've heard that I was doing some raving there, and there was other things. I couldn't keep my head still. I didn't know that until later. But when I came to, I was up in no time at all, and I was out on the track. I was feeling all right. Archie Benson was there, and he had his helmet, and his helmet had a hole. It went through his helmet, but he was there and just had a graze on his scalp. 3 days, I would guess, after that I was evacuated on the first American hospital train out of Paris. And it wasn't until I was on that train that I knew what was the matter with me, and I started to shave, and I cut my lip very badly because I had had a jerk which was involuntary, and they evacuated me over to the coast over south of Brest. I had shell shock. It was a kind of different than most all shell shocks. Almost all shell shocks that I was familiar with, or came to be familiar with, could not stand the noise. Even a drop of a pin in a hospital would almost cause involuntary actions. But mine was the other way around. I couldn't sleep. In the nighttime, when it was quiet, I had to have the noise. And so I would roam around the hospital at night. Think I had some blood pressure, I know I did through those days, and they were giving me new blood. I don't remember just how long I was there, but Marines had opened a casualty camp south of Paris, and I was allowed to go back there instead of being evacuated home. And they were at a place called Châtillon-sur-Cher on the Cher River. And I was given some duties there, acting police sergeant for the camp, and under a Marine doctor that was in the camp there, but also under an area Army doctor. And after I was better, at that time it was towards the latter part of July, and Chet rejoined me there. He had been hit by a piece of shrapnel through his helmet at Poissons, which followed Belleau Woods. And I think we attacked about the 11th of July. And I was lucky to miss the Battle of Soissons, because that undoubtedly was one of the worst ones. But Chet was a scalp wound, and so he joined there. Well, I had enough authority there to take him off the list of departures, and so he stayed with me at the camp, and it so happened that there was a whole company of Mitchell soldiers just a matter of 10-15 miles in the supply train. I used to ride with them at night on their trucks and sleep in the daytime, but I was getting better from my ailment and requesting to go back to the front. But the Marine doctor at the time wouldn't let me, but finally they were going to dismantle the camp, and they gave me my choice of going on MP duty in Paris or going back to the front with my company, and I chose that, which I was after. And actually I did not get well until I did get back to the front. Then Chet and I both went back and joined again our company the latter part of August on their way to the Saint-Mihiel front, where we jumped off, where we had a center position, that is the 2nd Division, had a center position in the Saint-Mihiel front where the Germans had been for 4 years. And we saw nurses being released in that drive that had been captured 4 years before. But that was a fast action drive, and it was a salient that was very damaging to the French and American armies, and the line was straightened out. That was in September. Towards the end of September, we were brought back in reserve and cleaned up a bit, then put with the French army to go on the Champagne front. Previous battles where we've been under American supervision, mostly. But on the Champagne front, we were requested by the French to join them, and we did that. And on the 3rd of October, we were put in reserve while the French jumped off on the Champagne front, which essentially is to capture Mont Blanc, which is practically all chalk stone and a high ridge. And where the Germans, again, had been for 4 years, even they had tunnels that were miles long, and I heard that they even had pianos down in those dugouts that were down there. The one thing that I do know was, or all that I saw, was the manholes where we would drop bombs down to clear the tunnels as we went by. But the one day that we stayed in reserve while the French went forward, I caught it at that time 180 French airplanes out in advance that were bombing ahead, and also the ammunition dumps beyond. But they didn't get too far, and we jumped off there on the 3rd of October. And it was very well entrenched. They had lots of pillboxes, and it was on slopes. And we lost lots of men, and we were headed towards Saint-Étienne. Then we traveled real too fast. We got flanked, and some of our fellows backing up in a clearing there, caught by cross machine gun fire, and several of the fellows got their legs hit. But we made our objective, and still in a line of trees with an open spot ahead. We could see the Spire 18 out ahead, and we could also see the Germans, and they were at about the limit of firing, but we think we got some of them all right. about 500 yards. But in this line of firing, Chet and I ended up side by side. We started digging foxholes, and about the time we were finished in there, we were shelled. We were being shelled about every 4 hours on that line. In the meantime there, a shell had landed in the dirt just ahead of Chet. Didn't hurt either of us, but it exploded, but we were down in our foxhole. But it blew Chet's overcoat up in the tree, and they thought there was a sniper up there. And they could see something up in that tree, and they were shelling us. Suddenly our liaison man came, and he said, no wonder they're shelling us, was the report that the liaison man thought, because he didn't think that there was enough reason. We were pretty well decimated there. We were only about 20 to 25% company strength at that point. And the 36th Division was brought up, and they went through us on an attack, but they didn't get far. They were disorganized, and they hadn't had enough training. And the thing that I remember then was that they had Browning machine guns. We had just the French machine guns, shows, and Brownings were new to us. Well, we went out, pulled back some of the wounded fellows, but we also pulled back some of the Browning machine guns and started taking them apart and finding out about them. But we weren't allowed to keep them because that wasn't the property of the 2nd Division, and it made us pretty mad. We were relieved from there and put back again into reserve. And then it wasn't until in November why then we were again started for the last drive of the war. So we joined other companies that had been on that front for 2 or 3 months, and the 2nd Division was given a pretty central part of the line. They jumped on from St. George's on about the 31st of October or the 1st of November. But we could travel pretty fast there, and by the 9th of November, we were on the banks of the Meuse River, but we were not across. And at that time, while we were hearing that the peace was going to be declared, but on the night of the 10th, while the 2nd Engineers tried to throw a pontoon bridge across the Meuse River, and I think they did, but there were very many killed because they were in there so close. But we felt very badly about that because we didn't feel that that was necessary. And on the 11th, the armistice was declared and fighting ceased. And Chet had gotten the flu about a week before that, about the 4th or 5th, and he had been sent back to the rear. And from there, when he got out of hospital, he went to the American University at Bonn, France. So he didn't get up into Germany.
Let me ask you a question there. What were you doing when you first heard that the armistice had been signed and the war was over? Where were you? What were you doing? And how did you greet the news?
Well, my recollection was that when I heard it, that it just didn't sound quite probable. Actually, 2 or 3 days before the armistice, on about the 7th or 8th, I had been detailed to head a burying party, to go back over the land and bury those that had been killed. And in doing that, I ran across the body of an aviator. I can't recall his name. It's a well-known name in Cleveland, but I can't just say it now. My memory fails that. But his plane was nearby, and he'd been killed. The name Gilsey comes to me, but I don't think that was right. And he was buried with the others, but the bodies had to be buried, and there was enough that I had been put in charge of that burial detail, so I wasn't right up next to the Meuse River when it was declared. I was in comparatively quiet sector because it was petering off at that time, but 11th was a bright day and then restful atmosphere when there were no more shells. It was hard to imagine that you could relax. And of course, that was over 50 years ago, so that I just remember that it was a great relief. It seemed to be beyond anything that you could realize at this time.
Did you feel like you were starting a new life?
No, I don't recall that. There's one thing about the war on the front lines. It's worse to think about it when you're not there than when you are there. is my reaction. The noise, the thunder, the guns and all gear you up so that you're not thinking of in terms of how terrible this is. You're thinking about what your job is, and you're going ahead. Even at the Saint-Mihiel front, I saw cannons firing point blank at us by the Germans. We were that close to them, within maybe 1,000 yards. And all you're doing is trying to get out of the line of fire if it's coming right at you, and they were missing. And Chet and I were there at Thiaucourt. We got into this town of Thiaucourt, and I think Chet has a colonel's wall map there. I have lots of pictures from the store that was there, German pictures. We had quiet, easy battles like Thiaucourt, where we traveled fast, made probably better part of 5 miles a day for a ways, and because of good preparation. And Champagne front was very bad. I know that Soissons that I met was very bad. Belleau was terrible because there's hand fighting in between there and the trees, and I missed that because I was just on the border and never got into it.
Baptisms of fire, I've witnessed your suffering as the battles raged higher. And though they did hurt me so bad in the fear and alarm, you did not desert me, my brothers in arms. These mist-covered mountains are a home now for me, but my home is the lowlands, and always will be. Someday you'll return to the valleys and your farms, and you'll no longer burn to be brothers in arms. You did not desert me, my brothers in arms.
So Uncle Jim sent me this package of World War I related items that Grandpa passed on to him. Some of these things Grandpa carried with him through the entirety of the war. I find some of these items really interesting, and so I'll try to quickly go through some of them here. The first thing I noticed, and these are priceless, they're George's diaries from 1918 and another one from 1919. And you can see with his diary of 1918, it's pretty small physically, and that means he had to write small. And also there's some ink issues in there where sometimes the ink would bleed or fade. And so it was early on that I decided I would want to transcribe it over to a Word document. And I'm not sure what I was getting into when I decided to transcribe it to a Word document, because some of the words were so faded or had bled, very difficult to read certain, like a paragraphs here and there. So anyway, I had to break out magnifying glass, and I mounted the magnifying glass in a vise, and I had my little spotlight here, and sometimes it would take me 10-15 minutes to make out to finally make out the letters of a word and finally put the word together. So, and then there's a diary from 1919. The war ended on November 11th, 1918, Armistice Day, but then came the occupation of Germany, which George was a part of. One highlight for George came when, on March 13th, he wrote in his diary that General Pershing came for an inspection, and he says General Pershing asked George where he was wounded, asked if he was well now, and spoke of appreciation and personally congratulated George. So that was a little highlight for young George there. And this 1919 diary also reminds me a little bit of a yearbook. The back pages are filled with name after name after name of his combat buddies. They also wrote down their addresses. Evidently, they were planning on getting together after the war to reminisce and share their war stories, which they did. I think they had several reunions over the years following World War I. And in reading some of the entries in his diary, I could tell that he was proud to be a Marine, especially a 6th Marine, and that with the 2nd Division. Indeed, the 6th Marines in the 2nd Division, they did so much of the heavy lifting in this war. He even copied over into his diary an article from Stars and Stripes magazine. That's a military magazine that they would get periodically over there. And this magazine listed the data for every division. And the 2nd Division, his division, was far and away the most accomplished, I guess you'd say. Okay, and I'd like to talk a little bit about some of the other items here in George's cache of goodies. The first thing is this dog tag. I'm not sure where his other one is at. Maybe he was buried with it. I'll have to ask Uncle Jim if he knows. This is George W. Ruth, 21st of June, 1917. That's when this was stamped out and given to him, assigned to him. USMC, of course, that's the United States Marine Corps. And the number on the back is the identification number, 123069. And this will tell you some things. It'll tell you that he belonged to the AEF, the American Expeditionary Force. This is the force of the group of guys that were some of the first to arrive in France after we declared war on Germany. It also tell you that he belonged to the 2nd Division, and it will tell you that he was 6th Marines. And the reason you had 2 dog tags, in case you were killed, one would stay with the body, and the other would be taken to be recorded into the records. And this next item is pretty cool. This is the tag that they put on George after he was injured at Bouresches, just outside of Belleau Wood, when he's blown off the ladder. Diagnosis, it says here, shell shock and treatment, morphine, of course. On the back it says American Evac Hospital. That's that hospital, that tent hospital that's on the Adderall racetrack just south of Paris. And the next item is this picture of George from a newspaper article in France. This is that Bouresches incident. And the article states that this is the 2nd time within a month that a Hun has got him. And also in this article, George said that it was not a very severe case and that he was eager to get back with his Marine Corps pals in the trenches and resume fighting. And this is the article that talks about how both brothers, George and his brother Chet, were wounded. This is the mustard gas at Verdun incident. How would you like to be a family member to get the news that not only one, but 2 of your family members were injured? But I guess that's a lot better than getting the news that both your brothers or sons had died in the war, in which case I wouldn't be here, and many of you family members watching this video wouldn't be here. But we're the lucky ones, especially when you think about all the generations of people that have been lost worldwide to this truly senseless war that World War I was. And this little item is kind of interesting. It's a ration stamp or punch card coupon for Königsbacher beer that he picked up during the occupation. And I looked up this company online, this brewery. Amazingly, they're still in business. They were founded, it says on here, in 1689, so more than 300 years later. This company is going strong. I see that one of the holes have been punched on this punch card, I assume. And there's still one hole that needs to be punched. and so I wonder if they'll still honor this if somebody took it over there and presented it to them. And you flip it over, and Grandpa wrote something on the back. It says, at a Dumpelfeld, B-I-E-R, that's beer, at the Dumpelfeld Beer Cafe on the evening of December 7th. This beer was made on the Rhine and tasted good. And I should hope so after everything our soldiers went through up to this point. And one more historic item I see here. It's a leaflet or a flyer that our Allied biplanes would drop out by the tens of thousands over German troop positions. And these were propaganda flyers that were meant to coerce the German soldier into surrendering. So I ended up typing this message into the translation program online, and here's the translation it gave me for this flyer. And I'm not going to leave it up long enough for you to read. You can pause the video and read it if you like. And here's a story I thought was interesting. Here's that photo of Jim and my mom Nancy in WWI, Nevada. And Jim tells me that this belt buckle that he's wearing was given to him by his dad George. Do you know what? I think I'll let Uncle Jim explain this one.
A little bit of history about this buckle. About 9 or 10 years old, I would occasionally go down in the basement where my father had a big sea bag with some old uniforms in it and some war souvenirs. At that time, I would pick this buckle up out of the sea bag and look at it and put it back in. When I was about maybe 12 or 13, I pulled the buckle out of the sea bag and I asked my father at that time, how did he acquire it? And though my father was very reluctant to talk about his experiences in the war, most of the things that he would relate to the family were kind of happy things or interesting things. He never spoke about the killing, but he was quite willing to talk about this buckle. He said the Marine battalion that we were in was making a charge on German lines, and his unit overran a German machine gun nest. And as my father passed through, he saw this buckle on the German soldier and paused long enough to pick it up and stick it in his pocket. Sometime later, maybe several months later, he and his buddies were on leave in Paris, and they were sitting at an outdoor table, and my father was showing this buckle to his buddies, and a couple of Frenchmen at a nearby table overheard the conversation, and they said, "Marine, that's not a German buckle, that's a French buckle." And between the Frenchmen and my father's friends, they kind of discussed how did it happen to be on a German soldier. Probably went into Germany on a French soldier in the Franco-Prussian War. Now the Franco-Prussian War was about 1870, but my wife and I visited, Aunt Marion and I visited Paris back in 1987, and I took the occasion to go to the French military museum there. And much to my happy surprise, in a case there was a mannequin of a French uniform, and on that belt was an exact duplicate of this buckle. And the little plaque below said that it was the uniform of a French engineering battalion, and the date on it, the museum date on it, was 1857. So now we know that this was a French buckle that was on a French uniform in 1857 and probably did go to Germany during the Franco-Prussian War. When I was 20 years old, I asked my father if I could have the buckle, and he was quite willing to give it to me. I have worn that belt now since I was 20 years old, and I've enjoyed it, and many people in the family and friends and strangers have asked me about this, and I have a quick, about 30-second explanation of it, that it's an antique belt buckle prior to the Franco-Prussian War.
And finally, my Uncle Jim has a plaque hanging in his house, in his home, with some of the medals that Grandpa earned from his duty in World War I.
Oh, misty eye of the mountain below. Keep careful watch of my brother's souls. And should the sky be filled with fire and smoke, keep watching over during storms. If this is to end in fire, then we should all burn together. Watch the flames climb high into the night, calling out, Father, hold, stand by, and we will watch the flames burn over and on the mountainside. We should die tonight, we should all die together. Raise a glass of wine for the last time, calling out, Father, prepare us as we will watch the flames burn open on the mountainside. Desolation comes upon the sky. Now I see fire